Welcome to Resilient Earth Radio, where we host speakers from the United States and around the world to talk about critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking. We also let our listeners learn how they can get involved and make a difference. This is Leanne Lindsay, host, filmmaker, and GM of KGUA 88.3 FM independent public radio station, along with Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study in both Mendocino and Sonoma counties of Northern California. Welcome to the morning show here at KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. We are streaming around the world at kgua.org. Just click listen live at the top of the page. I'm Leanne Lindsay, and today's segment is Resilient Earth Radio. And my co-hosts are here with me as well. Our guest today, Ted Cheeseman with Happywhale. He is the co-founder and director. He grew up whale watching in California's Monterey Bay. In 1980, his parents, both naturalists and educators, founded Cheeseman's Ecology Safaris. And in 1994, Ted joins the company as a leader of ecology-based wildlife safaris, working on all 7 continents. And after earning a Master's of Science in Conservation Biology from Duke University, Ted returned to the company to lead polar expeditions. Since that time, Ted has been deeply involved in all aspects of Antarctic tourism management. He served on the executive committee of the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators for 5 years, where he helped minimize the environmental impact of tourism in Antarctica. Ted has experienced firsthand the impacts of humans on marine ecosystems, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. Good morning, Ted, and good morning to my co-hosts.
Morning.
Morning, Ted.
Good morning. Good morning to Tree and Scott as well. Thank you.
Hey, Ted. And I hear that Scott here has known you since a young boy.
It's true. Actually, it's funny. In all this, I dug back through some of the whales I photographed as a kid, and I found a photo from the Gulf of Maine, from Stellwagen Bank. I think it was out on a boat with Scott when I was 11 or 12 or 14 maybe, and found a whale that I could identify from back then. It was pretty cool. I was excited about that.
I'll just mention here real quick what the mission of Happywhale is for our audience, and it's to increase global understanding and caring for our marine environments through creating high-quality conservation science and education. And they aim to make it easy and rewarding for the public to participate in science. And so how? Well, that's what we're going to find out, and by anyone who's interested in marine mammals and that want to serve the research community with powerful collaborative tools. And you were just beginning to talk about that, Ted.
Yeah, this has been so exciting. I mean, as you mentioned, I ran wildlife safaris for a long time. I'm no longer involved in that, but the company still exists, Cheeseman's Ecology Safaris, that my parents started when I was I guess I was 7 years old, and I ran the company for a long time and such. And I'm no longer involved, but they're doing fantastic expeditions. And for me, it was this 30 years of mainly focusing on Antarctica. And in that course of time, for me, as much as I really loved what I was doing, I really wanted to get back to science. That's kind of a lot of my motivation. And so this really was an experiment of saying, hey, could we put together, I grew up at the edge of Silicon Valley. I kind of had just a lot of experience with technology and this concept that we could do great things if we frame it right, but also the experience of working with people and guiding and this educational experience. That was very much my father's influence of loving to share the knowledge and the joy and love and inspiration. So the idea was, hey, could we take pictures from the public, right? Let's build a website. We called the website Happywhale just to be fun about it, right? And we build a website and say, hey, send us your whale photographs. If we could then identify the whales in these photographs and tell the contributors who their whale was, it'd be something rewarding, right? Something special, something that you couldn't otherwise necessarily know is like, right, yes, that's a beautiful whale, but who is that whale? Because each of these animals are individuals and they have their stories and not very accessible, but these are dramatic stories with whales navigating the sea and swimming by the port of Long Beach or the port of San Francisco or up the Oregon coast and navigating shipping lanes, navigating crab traps, and also dealing with changing seas. To me, these are stories I really wanted essentially to make the whales able to tell, but was a bit of a reach. So we thought, well, if we could put together image recognition technology, it's a long-standing technique to identify individual whales by their tails. It's really fantastic. It stretches back into the late 60s, early 70s. I'm super excited. I'm actually going to meet one of the folks, Chuck Giraz, who was one of the discoverers or inventors of photo ID up in Alaska in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm actually going to meet him next week, in part hoping that we can get some of these earliest photos available. But basically what we've done is automated image recognition so that when we receive that photo, instead of it being searching through catalogs, we can just basically instantaneously give our photo to the photo ID. This is AI as a tool. It comes up with a best possible match and we say yes or we say no. The computer's not making decisions. It's basically searching the data. We then make the decision. We say, yes, that's a match. No, that one's not a match, whatever.
It's just a tool.
And gosh, it's worked better than our our wildest dreams.
And we can see the passion on your face, and you're so engaged in your topic. Sherry Goforth Eby, we just heard from not long ago, too, and she is so passionate about identifying whales and photographing them, and she gets all this great equipment, and she just travels everywhere, and that's what she does, too. She loves doing this kind of work. And does she supply information to Happywhale?
Oh, she does.
I bet she does.
She sends you lots of photos, Ted, of whales she sees here, both gray whales, humpback whales, and it really is such an incredible tool. Like you said, it tells the story of that whale.
It's a neat one, and I didn't really expect, but it's a large community, but in a way, especially, it's I've never met Sherry personally, but I know her photos.
Yeah.
And that's a fun one. I mean, we've had over 20,000 contributors to Happywhale, but it's very, shall we say, a J-shaped curve, a little sciencey there. You have some folks that contribute a lot, and a lot of people who contribute. They went out whale watching once, and they took one photo with their iPhone, and that's nice. But the heart of the science is these enthusiasts who then share it onward and tell. And Sherry's, it's neat because she's sending us these gray whale photos. Really started with humpbacks, and we've really nailed it with humpbacks. At this point, almost every living humpback whale in the North Pacific is in this database.
Incredible.
Wow. This is on your website, your top contributors of all time. And we're looking at the Pacific Whale Foundation that has contributed over almost 30,000 photos. There's a whole list of thousands and thousands of photographs, and I can understand why a machine learning type tool like AI can definitely help sort through all that data so fast.
Yeah, and in that, I want to make sure to kind of put this into context. Humpbacks were a really great species to start on because there were so many individual efforts that built up these catalogs for so many years. Research collaborators, I think the site is well known for its citizen science end, but actually much of it, the part that's not so publicly visible, is that it's really a research tool where scientists can get their data together and compare it in a way that wasn't really possible before. But we already knew a lot of these whales, and that's been one of the fantastic things. Some of these whales have like 10 different IDs because all these different research catalogs that, had been built on years and hours and so much time and, eyeballs just staring at photos. that really made the mountain on which we're able to climb a little bit higher. A lot of credit due to those who brought it to here. And then Sherry's bringing us, for example, she's bringing us all these gray whales, which is a species that is also recognizable. Different animals are ideable by different parts. Humpback whales, we use the tails. So when they dive, they usually lift their tail on the underside. They're all unique. It's like facial recognition or a fingerprint.
Right. And you even have a rocket scientist on your team, Ken Sutherland.
And an absolute the backbone of our ability to do this. He's not the one showing up on the podcast because he's got to do the important work of actually making the system run. He's our lead programmer and has been the programmer from 2015 onwards. We opened the website in August 2015. It's one of these things like each day you feel like, oh, it's so hard to make progress, but you look back and realize like, wow, we've come so far. So Ken's been with us throughout, and that's really the core of it, is being able to put together this tech that's the system, not just like, woo, this magical algorithm, but people being able to show up, upload their photos, get the feedback. If we are able to identify your whale, we'll send you a notification anytime that whale is seen, so you can track that whale through its migrations. And yeah.
I know that Scott has several questions that he wants to ask you, so let's get underway with one of those.
It was interesting you mentioned the whale detective, because I was set up late one night and I came on PBS, and it was just one person after another that I knew, and then we got to you in your garage, and you went over the ID photos. That was really interesting. And then at the end he asked you to keep an eye on his whale. That was fun. So that was a great
Tom Mustill is the documentarian, and he went on and wrote a really good book, fantastic book exploring exactly the same topic. But we ended up naming the whale Prime Suspect because was it absolutely the whale? It was tough. We didn't have good photos, but we kind of narrowed it down. We're pretty sure.
Prime Suspect, that's good.
Yeah, it's quite a shocking opening to that show, too. And I was sitting there deciding whether to go to bed or not. And the show started with a man and his girlfriend getting breached on off Moss Landing. So you got to sit and watch it.
You do.
Find out what happened. And then you and Peter and others went about identifying the whale through flipper markings and tail flukes. And the whale showed you quite a bit since they were airborne at the time, just before they hit the water. And seeing the whale looking over its shoulder, trying to avoid the kayak, what's this in front of me as I'm landing? That was pretty interesting. But what question I wanted to ask you was, of the different body parts of the whales, we see the flukes more often than anything else, but how valuable do you guys have a ratio now of, like with dorsal fin IDs? How reliable are those? And also flipper markings. We don't see those parts as often as we do flukes.
Yeah, great question. I mean, the thing about dorsal fins with humpback whales, that there's a lot less information in them, but they're also basically always going to be visible, right? So it's like, gosh, it would be great if we could consistently and confidently ID a whale from their dorsal fin. But could we build a data set? I mean, at this point, we've got over 100,000 whales, humpback whales in this catalog, and it's global. And we compare every whale to every whale in the world, right? Could we do that with dorsal fins? Well, so there's a distinctiveness aspect about a dorsal fin, right? Some are very distinct, and absolutely you could compare them from anywhere in the world, but others are far less so. So dorsal fins are really useful, and we have an algorithm. We're refining it. We're building out the pipeline to basically manage these more challenging aspects of distinctiveness and such. And it's particularly important because sometimes if a whale is entangled, sometimes, mothers with their calves in wintering areas, in the breeding areas, very rarely will the mothers fluke, or much less commonly will they fluke. So if you're only looking at the tails, you're looking at a biased set. It's like not counting a certain set of the population. What if censuses didn't count women as much as they count men? That would be a problem, right? And so that's literally, one of the challenges we face. So dorsal fins, yeah, very valuable. And because of this new algorithm development, what we really like is when a photographer sends us like a dorsal to fluke series of photos so that we can link that dorsal fin to the tail. There's a case, and it's a sad case right now up in British Columbia, of a whale that was found actually with the tail cut off because of an entanglement.
No.
Just brutal, just really brutal. The whale's tail got caught in
Yeah.
some probably a pot fishing trap, like a crab trap or something, with a line up to the surface, and the whale swam through it. The line got wrapped around the tail, tightened up, literally cut the tail off. If we could ID the dorsal fin, I haven't seen high quality dorsal fin images. I know that Jackie Hildering of MARES, Marine Ecology and Research, Marine Education Research Society in British Columbia, is trying to do this, try to identify the individual. Hopefully we'll be able to find out who that is. But other things like, pectoral fins are super distinct, but do we often see them? Not so much, right? To be able to identify that animal, we need to have persistent features and be able to see them. It'd be like, look, we might have very unique bottoms, but we don't actually see everyone's bottoms. And maybe we don't want to, but even if we had barcodes on all of our bottoms, it wouldn't be very helpful because they're usually covered up, right?
Well, you're listening to the voice of Ted Cheeseman. He's the co-founder and director of Happywhale. And we have with us our co-hosts Scott and Tree Mercer of Mindanoma Whale and Seal Study. And I'm Leanne Lindsay, founder of Sea Storm Studios, a film and voice production company, and GM of KGUA Public Radio here in Wallala, California. We are broadcasting at 88.3 FM. We stream worldwide at kgua.org. And this segment of our morning show is called Resilient Earth Radio, dropping to all podcast platforms. And we really focus on some of the critical issues and what some of the positive actions are being taken around our planet. And we'll be right back right after this message.
Coming up on Resilient Earth Radio, Howie Garrett of the Orca Whale Sighting Network, which encourages observation to increase awareness and knowledge about the community of orcas and other marine mammals in the Puget Sound. They foster a stewardship ethic to motivate a diverse audience to take action to protect and restore their critical habitat. They believe it's time to reflect, reconnect, and respond as better caretakers of this planet. Tune in to Resilient Earth Radio, where we are elevating awareness about these critical topics and positive efforts through our radio show and podcast. Thanks for listening. Subscribe below and find us on Facebook and Instagram. We are Resilient Earth Radio, a project of Planet Centric Media.
Welcome back to Resilient Earth Radio. And one of the reasons we're talking with Ted today is because this issue of identifying whales is so important. And I want you to focus on that for a moment, Ted, about some of the reasons why your work is so critical.
Well, there's two things to me that really stand out, and I guess I'd like to highlight them with some results, right? First is just awareness. The clearest picture of this was in Antarctica. There's some wonderful stories in this. I mean, I think environmental stories so often are pretty depressing, right? But here, humpback whales and all the great whales were hunted nearly to extinction. And then whaling was banned. Globally, society said, hey, these animals, they're valuable. They're important. They're not just valuable for their products, but they're valuable. We want them alive. And globally, whaling was banned. And around the world, almost every population of almost every species, there's some really important exceptions, but they've really recovered well. So nowadays, it's this really beautiful story of these whales recovering back towards their original numbers. Now, I was experiencing this in Antarctica, and as we started doing this work, when I first started going to Antarctica, we almost never saw whales. We saw very, very few. But starting in the 2000s, we would see more and more. And then with Happywhale in the mid-2010s, we started seeing lots and lots of whales. And I started looking at the spatial patterns and started looking at the numbers and realized, okay, the whale population's recovering and tourism is growing. There needs to be some action taken to reduce the risk of conflict. We proposed, a bunch of us got together, kind of the whale scientists and whale enthusiasts got together and proposed to Antarctic tourism. There's an association, proposed to them that we really needed to manage the risk of ship strikes. Thought it'd be a big fight. Thought it'd be what are you saying? We slow the ships down. We can't do that. Look, we've got commercial interests. We got to do this. We're not really a risk to the whales. Show me the dead bodies. The reality was quite different. The reality was fantastic. And I believe that happy whales, like the positive experience of people photographing their whales and learning that they're individuals. The ship operators really engaged in this. They proposed to their guests that they be involved in citizen science. It was this really positive things that people could do and contribute to science. And then we turned around and said, yes, but there's risk. And the ship operator said, good point. And actually, very quickly, the entire association turned around and restricted feeds of vessels for a 20,000 square kilometer area to maximum of 10 knots. 3 years later, actually upped that and doubled the area and extended the season. So now it's approximately 40,000 square kilometers of the most heavily trafficked parts of Antarctica, where ships are limited to 10 knots. So to me, this was like just a win of conservation, able to do a thing, able to do something important for the preservation and protection of these species just because of awareness. That was, I was just delighted. And I'm really proud. I mean, I'm no longer directly involved in Antarctic tourism other than saying, hey, please engage with us for the science. But I'm really proud of this association. I used to be on the executive committee, but that was long before this, doing what I consider the right thing and preemptively, not waiting until there was a dead body on their hands. But the other really important thing is just the core science. These animals are hard to study. They're out of sight. It's easy for something out of sight, out of mind to be, well, we don't know, so we're just going to do our thing. And entanglements and ship strikes, these are the two most direct human activities that hurt big whales. There's marine pollution, there's sound pollution, there's all kinds of other stuff. But like in terms of just physically directly for the great whales, the baleen whales, the humpbacks, blue whales, ship strikes and entanglements are the big things. And this has really allowed us to know what's going on in finer detail. But then also, the largest marine heat wave ever recorded was the blob.
The blob.
With sort of anyone who fishes or lives and loves the Eastern Pacific, especially Northeastern Pacific, it's like, this was a thing. It was a major change. The ecology just shifted. Well, in Southeast Alaska, a lot of whales were turning up emaciated, some stranded, dead, but the numbers weren't huge. It was just like, whoa, what's happening to our whales? There was a lot of measurement on individual whales, especially Glacier Bay National Park. But the scale of what was happening was just absolutely not possible to appreciate until we got all the data together. And because we were able to bring forward this data set of literally almost every living whale, well, we published a paper back in February, and it's kind of painful to see. It's really painful to see, but we estimated that 7,000 whales, about 20% of the North Pacific population, perished, and we believe it would be largely because of starvation. They literally, because of the marine heat wave, weren't getting enough food.
That's 7,000 whales. Huh? That's wild. That's off the charts.
So back in April, actually, along with publishing that report, I finished my PhD. It was a big lift. So I tell you what, sometimes in terms of direct impact, sometimes I think the biggest thing my PhD got me was, sore wrists from typing a lot and lower back pain. But it's been a really intensive and fantastic experience. And for me, a lot of this was, okay, built Happywhale, did a PhD with the data that came out of Happywhale. And I said to myself, once I'm done my thesis, I will, and there's this big field of things that this system needs. Happywhale has become, I kind of think of it as a beautiful monster. It needs constant feeding. And what really needs to happen now is the system to become sustainable. And for that, I mean, honestly, we're actually about to enter into a big capital raising campaign. But the goal is not just like, yay, give us money, but what we've done with humpback whales, we can do with quite a few species. Sherry's gray whales are a great example, right? They're a bit harder to identify, but we clearly can. We did a research project, a small project within Happywhale a few years ago, where we developed an algorithm to identify whales by their dorsal fins and by their flanks and the patterns and shape and such. It works on blue whales, works on gray whales, works even on fin whales, which, for anyone who doesn't know, a fin whale, second largest whale in the world, all black. They do have distinct dorsal fins, but you have to be really exacting about it. It's challenging. This works on them. So I'm really excited to scale this to multiple species, but also really improve the tools for getting data out. I mean, to me, I look at some of these animals, and we have records stretching back for years and hundreds of sightings, but there's a lot of story underneath that. It'll be a really fun and, I think, exciting process to kind of develop the tools within which we can, kind of reach into that story. And what does it mean? Migratory timings or unexpected movements. We have whales that show up in places that aren't expected. And that's, is that because of climate change? It seems like not, actually. That's one of the elements that we're finding here, is that these whales are very consistent with their migratory patterns, even while the oceans are changing. So there's a lot we can learn from it. Yeah, that's really where we're going from here, is trying to get the most out of it we can and make it as usable and functional and fun for those involved,
Yeah, Ted, you know that we all had our lowest numbers this year for gray whales, all of us counting on the coast here. One of the things we've been wondering is if the migration route has changed a bit, if they're weaving more out offshore. Elisa had really low numbers, and we were down quite a bit too. And, if you heard anything about that.
It's gray whale, so not my area of expertise. I've been talking with Leah Torres from Oregon State, and then Cascadia Research, and your work, Lisa's work.
Definitely their work,
the depth of experience there is something I have a lot of respect for. I'm hoping this can contribute to that. I don't know, and we've certainly seen that local migratory patterns will shift. The broader extent of it, I mean, it's really interesting to see with gray whales. You've got one thing I am aware of is we think of gray whales as primarily feeding up in the Chukchi Sea, Alaskan, Russian waters, really high latitudes. But it seems like those animals that are augmenting that feeding or shifting feeding behavior to feed in Puget Sound, feed along the coast, feed in some of these shallow estuarine areas. I mean, that stuff is amazing. These whales that are feeding only at high tide, digging these holes to feed on the benthic creatures, seafloor creatures, and then scooting out before the tide drops and strands them. That's kind of a dodgy technique, but it seems to be. And it may be that the changing oceans basically are requiring them to be a bit inventive like that,
Tree, you're the one that's always tracking the numbers.
It really is interesting to start to see trends. I think it's important work so we can just see how this population overall is doing in these changing conditions. We have data from this coast with the gray whales. This was our 11th season. We're starting to accumulate a good database. You need long-standing data for comparisons and to reach any type of conclusion. And as I said, to see trends.
They were also in that documentary washed ashore. Why whales do wash ashore. Tell a little bit about that documentary.
That was two graduate students from UC Berkeley. They were concerned about the unusual mortality event that was going on with the gray whales. They did a wonderful job, very thorough, right from Mexico, their breeding and birthing grounds, all the way up to Alaska. And they did a really great job, but data changes quickly. I mean, at this point, even some of the data that they presented is now outdated.
But it's historical.
It is.
Exactly what Happywhale is doing is documenting, identifying. This is a talk that we're having today with Ted Cheeseman. He's co-founder and director of Happywhale, and Ted's got this amazing background in ecotourism too, and you got a degree from Duke University. Is it Masters of Science in Conservation Biology?
Yes, although that was focused on terrestrial tropical ecosystem. I loved tropical forests as a child. I wanted to be kind of lost in the forest like Alfred Russel Wallace, kind of Charles Darwin-esque. But, things grow on you in the forest like mold, and there's a lot of tropical diseases. And I found that once I overcame seasickness, I'm very fond of the oceanic and polar regions. But also a lot of it was just the pure inspiration of, time with whales just changed my life. Need to be able to provide something that's really of value to the research community and the public at large. I mean, getting people fired up to appreciate these animals as individuals, to appreciate them as beautiful creatures that they can follow, like that's just the best.
And I think it's very interesting that your background in ecotourism, the safaris that your parents started, that you joined, help people understand responsible whale watching practices and principles. Talk a bit about that right now, since you've got that background.
Sure. Well, I think it's the neatest thing in the world that you can go out on a whale watch boat, go out on a private boat, be out among these whales. And if you behave responsibly, which is not hard to do, it's just like, look at that animal as an individual. I mean, there's laws around this, right? The U.S. has Marine Mammal Protection Act, where we are not legally allowed to harass that animal at all. But I kind of like to go a bit further and just think, as a member of a civil society, that's an animal that I respect. Why would I harass that animal, right? And if we approach it that way, drive the boat slowly, don't charge directly towards them. I mean, with whales, oftentimes it's actually, with a little bit of thought, it's actually pretty easy to have these incredible experiences. If you drive the boat, say, parallel with the whale, sometimes that whale will get curious and come over to you. Or you get a couple 100 yards from the whale, 100 yards from the whale, and turn off the engine. Put the engine in neutral. Maybe the whale will come over to you. When we act responsibly around those animals, then they continue with their natural behavior, which is just the most wonderful thing. I mean, you think about it, the history of humanity, these animals were unknown, presumed hostile, right? There's like some mystery out there. The old nautical charts have there be monsters out there. At some point, they became not so unknown, but they were basically products, right? They changed from unknown, presumed hostile to commodities.
Right.
So then we were harassing them. We were we were slaughtering them. Antarctic blue whales, 99.9% of them were removed. I mean, there were probably 250,000. And by the time whaling ended, maybe there were 300, maybe there were 500 or 800, but like as low as 300. 999 out of 100 gone, right?
Wow.
Think of how that would change society.
Huge.
We use the word decimated to talk about when something's really hit hard. That means 10%. Imagine your town with only one person for every 1,000 people. That'd change your culture a little bit.
A little bit.
Right? But now they're recovering. To me, that we can be out among these whales and not change their behavior, have them even curious. The last time I was out in Monterey Bay, we were among these feeding animals. It was really special. And then this one animal just came over underneath our boat and just mugged us. We couldn't even move. We had to put the engine into neutral and then kill the engines. We had to cut the engine so that the propeller wouldn't hit the animal. Everyone's taking pictures as well. And then after about 10 minutes, people started holding up their cameras and taking selfies with the whale themselves in front of the whale. Kept popping its head up and looking at it. I was a little
Taking
frustrated
cameos
because it
there.
never lifted its tails, but it was just magical. And it wasn't even possible until just a few years ago, relatively speaking. Gray whales kind of did this first in Mexico, where they started curiously coming up to boats instead of, they were called devilfish, right? They're called devilfish because if you speared the calf, the mom would fight really hard and sometimes crush the whale boats. I'm like, devil? I don't know
Mama
if you
bear.
speared my kid.
Well, I
Yeah.
see this parallel between the interaction and behaviors around whales, similar to our knowledge now with horses, learning to respect the horse and be able to acknowledge their behavior and interact with them in a way that you're engaging them to actively participate with you and backing off and not being such aggressive behavior towards them. It builds a whole new relationship with a horse. I just see that when I listen to you talk about the whales and the way that we've changed our behavior towards being around them. Part of a way that we can replace abusing these resources and using them up is to build a different type of tourism around them or economy.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that analogy to the horses. And I think anyone who's worked with horses knows they have personalities, right? You have this animal that's just sweet and kind, and that animal, whoa, stay away from that animal. Don't walk behind the horse, might get kicked. And they have personalities too. So my sister does horse therapy workshops where just spending time with these animals is very curative of basically psychologically challenging situations, right? And I feel that way sometimes just being out in nature among these whales. And I think you're quite right about the responsible whale watching. One thing I want to stress is, we ask people to photograph these animals and get high quality photos so that we can identify them. But it's really important to never use the excuse, oh, I'm doing this for science, to charge up on the animal. In fact, get any kind of decent telephoto lens and you can get the kind of quality photos that we need. So I think responsible whale watching practices in U.S. waters, most ports and most operators I see are quite responsible. We have laws around it. We also have civil society also sort of asks that of us. Around the world, there's a huge range of that. I see pictures of just both mobbing whales. And that's the case where, yes, it's great that we're enthusiastic about these animals, but let's not love them to death,
Right.
and that's
the point right there.
Yeah. And I really hope this kind of a tool to allow people to see these animals as individuals can help us realize that it's not just a tourist attraction. It's not just some sensational thing to try to get a selfie with that animal, but in fact, a living, breathing, sentient creature that has its own concerns. A mother with a calf needs to be able to feed that calf. If we harass that mother, that might radically change her ability to raise her calf. And you bring a great point. It's just the economy of this. My friend Kate Spencer, she's a guide, whale watch guide in Monterey Bay. One time I was sitting with her and she was doing some back of the envelope math calculations. I'm like, what you doing? And she was like, well, I was trying to work out what the value of anchovies are as whale food as compared to as fishing product. And her thesis, her hypothesis was that that these fish in the sea are actually potentially more valuable as food for these whales that then gets monetized through whale watching than necessarily just taking the fish themselves. Certainly that's the case with whales, and Iceland is grappling with this. They have ports that have whaling vessels and whale watching vessels side by side. Whale watching now produces more economic activity than whaling ever did. It's much more profitable. It's also more sustainable. It's a great thing, I think.
This is Ted Cheeseman. He's the co-founder and director of Happywhale. We're on the West Coast too. We're just north of you up the Northern California coast. With me are my co-hosts, Scott and Tree Mercer of Mindanoma Whale and Seal Study. They lived on the East Coast for a long time, and now they live permanently here on the West Coast. Thank you for all the dedication and work that you do as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ted, we mentioned Ralph Chalmey earlier, and I don't know if you know this story about how he had an encounter with a blue whale and Andy Pershing in the Sea of Cortez. He wanted to see a blue whale, and he went out with this group of scientists, including Andy Pershing, and they found a blue whale, and it so changed Ralph's life that he did take a sabbatical from the International Monetary Fund and has calculated the value of a average-sized baleen whale. It was carbon sequestration with a forest of trees, obviously. And he came up with one whale is worth 2,000 trees, 2,000 mature trees in carbon sequestration. And now they're switching their work to this blue-green project, is forest elephants in Central Africa. And when they showed people who had been poaching how they could make so much more money by working in the national parks and taking people out to see them, the elephants were doing so much conservation work for them in the national parks with the different trees that they trimmed during their feeding. And one thing I wanted to mention with you is a contribution that Cheeseman's expeditions made once. I was sitting in a meeting in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and suddenly the people from Allied Whale that were doing an update on the North Atlantic humpback whale catalog mentioned Cheeseman expeditions. So I sat right up, and they were talking about a fluke shot that one of your passengers had taken on one of the distant trips that your family always sponsored, and it was a humpback. I immediately pulled out my cell phone and I emailed your dad, and he wrote me back instantly with all that enthusiasm he had about, oh my God, that was incredible, your dad. Do you remember that? That set off a competition between gray whale people and humpback whale people about who has the longest migration.
I love it. I do, because that was kind of one of the founding inspirational moments. This was in 2012. I was guiding a group in Franz Josef Land, which probably 90% of the folks listening will have never heard of. And take a globe, look at it from the top, or Google Earth, go to the North Pole, one of the northernmost archipelagos in the world. It's in the Russian Arctic, no longer accessible under current circumstances. If you look at any map of global distribution of humpback whales, it's way north of there, right? We don't think of humpback whales being that far north. But yeah, we found a pod of humpback whales feeding on a shallow bank just south of Franz Josef Land. And I got on the ship's PA, said, hey, this is really special. Try to get fluke photos. There's this thing. We can send them to Allied Whale. They'll try to match it. They found matches to two of these whales. One of them was photographed by the great Ken Balcom, rest in peace, amazing conservationist, killer whale biologist. Yeah. He had been working down in the Dominican Republic, I think it was 1982, that actually found a match between the Silver Bank of the Dominican Republic, a breeding area offshore, 60 miles north of the Dominican Republic, all the way up to Franz Josef Land. If this whale wanted to go to the closest wintering area, it would have swam to Hawaii. It's closer to go over the North Pole to Hawaii. So when folks at Allied Whale told me this, it was just this great moment of the potential impact of just being there, taking the picture, connecting it to science. Now it's a lot easier to do that, but that was pretty special. I love that. I love that you were there at the meeting. That's and my dad's enthusiasm.
And on that note, that's going to conclude our show today with Resilient Earth Radio. That was Ted Cheeseman with Happywhale, and he's the director and co-founder. Thank you, Ted, for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
That was great, Ted.
Thank you. Great to talk with you all, and pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Congratulations on your PhD, Ted.
Yeah. Yes.
Quite an accomplishment.
Thank you for listening to your public radio station, KGUA 88.3 FM. Thank you, Scott and Tree Mercer, for being here with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks for listening to Resilient Earth Radio, where we talk about critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking. I'm Leanne Lindsay, producer and host, along with my co-producers and co-hosts, Scott and Tree Mercer of the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study. Produced in association with Planet Centric Media, Sea Storm Studios, and KGUA 88.3 FM, a public radio station on the Northern California coast. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and wherever you get your podcasts. The music for the show is Castles by the Sea from international composer Eric Alleman of the Sea Ranch in Sonoma County, California.